If you work as a manufacturing facilities engineer, installing a new piece of equipment can be as complex as the machinery itself. From prep work to alignment and testing, it's your team's job to put it all together. That's why it's good to have Grainger on your side. With industrial-grade products and next-day delivery, Grainger helps ensure you have everything you need close at hand through every step of the installation. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hey, ghoul friends, it's me, Adrian or Aiden. Either way, you are still listening to Susto, and I am still your host. And today I have a very, very special treat for you. We are joined by none other than Cynthia Pelayo, who is the first Boricua, the first Puerto Rican Bram Stoker Award winner. She is also the author of titles such as Forgotten Sisters, Children of Chicago, and The Shoemaker's Magician, in addition to writing genre-bending novels that incorporate fairy tale, mystery, detective, crime, and horror elements. Pelayo, or Sina as I've heard you like to be called, has written numerous short stories, including the collection Loteria and the poetry collection Crime Scene. The recipient of the 2021 International Latino Book Awards, she holds a Master of Fine Arts in Writing from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and she lives in Chicago with her family, and we will kind of drop this again later, but if you want to look into her now, you can visit cinapelayo.com. Cynthia, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to Susto.
Thank you for inviting me. I just love you. I love everything that you do, so thank you.
The music to my ears. I mean, again, I'm like, I told you right before we kind of started recording, I was like, I'm going to get into it, but I'm such a fan of this book, of your work. I think just right off the bat, something that I noticed in reading Vanishing Daughters, which should be available now, I can tell that you are a poet. Your writing is just so beautiful, and the world building that happens in your writing it's so cool. And so if y'all are looking for something to add to your, I'm sure already very long to be read piles, you need to get Vanishing Daughters. You need to put it at the top of that pile and read it because it is so, so good. Cynthia, would you care to kind of introduce the listeners to a little bit about who you are if maybe they don't know you yet?
Yeah. So I'm Cynthia Pelayo. My friends call me Sina. I'm Puerto Rican, so every Puerto Rican that you know probably has a Puerto Rican nickname. And so my oldest brother is Roberto Jr., but we call him Tito. We have a Tito in our family. Then we have Richard, who's Coco. Naturally, we get Coco from Richard. I don't know how we got that. And then my nickname just became Sina. And so that's a term of endearment. That's what my dad called me. My dad died in 2023. And so I'm still like reeling from that because I was super close with him. And I was born in Puerto Rico. My parents were born in Puerto Rico. My grandparents, great-grandparents. And so my family came here. They kind of went back and forth for a bit. And then finally in the 80s, they were like, we got to stay here for the kids so they can go to school. I mean, my parents have a 6th grade education. They grew up in houses with dirt floors. They had a latrine. And so they were just like, we could stay on the island and deal with, it's very difficult. It's going to be difficult for them, or we can be here and it's going to be difficult for them. But at least they'll have running water, because on the island there's issues with like the water and the electricity going out and things like that. So I think my parents knew, my dad especially knew, these kids are going to deal with racism. They're just going to deal with it. This is going to be their life. He was darker skinned, so he dealt with it quite extensively. I dealt with it, of course, being a woman and Latina. I recognize my privilege as being a lighter skinned Latina, and I do recognize that. It still hasn't shielded me from so much. And so I grew up in inner city Chicago, in the inner city, and our neighborhood quickly gentrified. We were the first Hispanics on the block. Within a few years, everybody else left. I went to inner city schools that didn't have the proper resources, but I made do. Like I I had librarians that recognized like she likes to read, but we get out of the beat up books. So I read a lot of like classics. I was the first person in my family to step foot in a college classroom. I had no idea what I was doing there because my high school was like 90% Latino. So to walk into a classroom with all white people, I was terrified. And it was the first day I ever experienced like straight up racism. Was the first day I entered a college classroom. And I came home crying because I told Dad, I was like, I'm not going back. And he's like, you're going back.
Yeah.
And I eventually worked as a journalist. I worked in for the inner city newspapers. I left journalism because of post-traumatic stress covering crime, and then I eventually got my MFA and started writing.
Wow.
Blending crime.
Wow. Yeah. And I mean, in reading your work, I kept thinking this is someone who has truly lived a robust life. And I don't know you personally. I don't know many of these details that I'm hearing now. So hearing them now, it's kind of also validation of like, how much of your life and yourself that you pour into your writing. And I think that is such a beautiful, vulnerable thing to do as a creator, as a writer, an author. And it truly shone through this book and on all of your work. But again, in reading this book, and I have some questions about it, it was so, I don't know, just like the grit, that it had was, I wanted to like hug you. I don't know if that's weird, but I was like, I just felt kind of also seen in some places where I was like, this person understands true loss. And so I want to thank you for putting that out there into the world because it can be very hard to do. But I think you are going to truly, truly impact a lot of people in a really positive way.
Thank you.
So I wanted to ask you, I guess the first question that I have here is, again, about the way that you blend crime, horror, and folklore into your writing, and especially in this book. Do you have a particular approach to balancing all of those genres? And additionally, what draws you to write these kinds of stories that mix those things with investigative elements?
I think with fairy tales and folklore, those were just the first stories I was told. My parents couldn't read English, and so what they did, they would just tell me whatever stories they remembered from like their kindergarten or their preschool or what was told to them. Like, whatever ghost stories my father remembers from like, the island. I remember him telling me that up on the mountains in Puerto Rico, you would late at night, you would see like lights all going up the mountain. And he's like, those are the ghosts of people that would walk up with their lanterns and they would fall off and they would like miss their step and fall off the mountain and die. So like things like this, they just like really stood out to me.
Yeah.
So fairy tales, were told to me by my mother and like ghost stories by my father. And then with covering crime, I think it's because I was exposed to so much crime growing up because I went to a high school that struggled. It was 90% Black and Latino and about 90% at the poverty rate, our high school. And so there was a lot of socioeconomic issues there and a lot of really good people there. But many of them were victims of circumstance. And so I unfortunately lost a lot of people to gun crime. I have friends who are serving life in prison for murder just because of so much. And it's still like, we still see it. We still see young people hurting each other. And that's something that stuck with me. Like, what we do this to people from a very young age. What is going on? And so I think that's where I started exploring it from my personal experience. I couldn't do it via realism because it's too painful for me to like write it without the monsters. So I write it with the monsters included, and that makes it a little bit more easier for me to mentally process.
Yeah, definitely. I've had someone on the show, a screenwriter and a director, say that horror is a really good analogy for attaching grief to. And honestly, I think for many emotions and kind of experiences that we have to go through as people. But kind of jumping back to this, what you mentioned about like your dad telling you stories about like, the lights in the mountain and other kinds of stories. Are there specific legends or stories, either real or fiction that influenced Vanishing Daughters. And I want to kind of just call it out specifically to why the idea of like Sleeping Beauty. I think that kind of like the story Sleeping Beauty was very prevalent in this book. And I read in a previous interview that you had mentioned your next book, which was Vanishing Daughters, was going to be kind of based around or built on the story of Sleeping Beauty. So I'm curious about that. And also if there were any other kind of legends that influenced this book.
I mean, definitely just the concept of La Llorona, because I know, there's the story that she did the horrible thing with her children. Of course, it's a folk story or legend. Do we know that? And so I am fascinated that so many of these legends and folk stories are around women becoming monstrous because they were either murdered or something bad happened to them. And so that was my fascination with it. And then I kind of thought about the Vanishing Hitchhiker, which is a woman in white. And that story, you have that legend all across the globe. You have it throughout Latin America. You have it throughout Europe. You have it all. Like, I feel like every single state in America has a vanishing hitchhiker, and it's very often a woman dressed in white. And so I guess I just started thinking, why are we scared of it? Is it a ghost that was hit by a car? Is it a ghost that was like murdered? Is it a ghost that like fell down that like? And so just the fact that we create monsters out of what I think were murdered women, I think is sad.
Yeah, 100%. And you mentioned that, and I'm so glad that you kind of like said it almost verbatim. So I mean, I have the reader's copy here, and I don't know if you can see, I have all my tabs here on the book, because the way that I read a book is like anytime something kind of like impacts me or that I think is like really strong, I leave a little tab, and there are many tabs here in this book. But one line that I want to read, if you don't mind, and it just to echo what you said, it says, "Why do we fear the ghosts of women who were murdered? Why don't we fear the thing that made them what they are?" Yeah. And oh my God, I just got chills right now reading it. But when I my first read through of this, that I like, again, it just kind of, it hit me like a ton of bricks, and I was like, oh, it was just like, it's painful and it's sad. Like that is kind of like that is true. Like that's what happens. And those are also the kinds of conversations that I try to initiate when I'm telling these stories, especially like you said, with the story of La Llorona. That is such a classic story. I love this kind of, I'm not sure what to call it, if it's like a reclamation or like a restructuring or whatever about the way people are now talking about the story of La Llorona or La Malinche, and kind of approaching it from a more like human, like empathetic space, instead of like, no, like she's a bad person, she's just a ghost, this and that. Whereas I don't know if you believe in astrology, I'm a Cancer, so I have a lot of like feelings and emotion. And so whenever I hear these stories, I'm like, no, but I want to know their side. Yes, I'm a Virgo rising. But then you also mentioned the trope of the vanishing hitchhiker, which again was also very prevalent in this book. And like you said, it's a classic tale. And your use of it in this book, it was so nostalgic, because it's also one of the stories that I heard growing up. And I wanted to ask you more about your relationship with that story, although you just kind of mentioned about it. But I also wanted to say, growing up, there is a book, and I constantly, I'm sure my listeners are tired of hearing of it, I'm constantly referencing it on Susto. It's a book called Stories That Must Not Die. And in the questions that I sent you, there's a link to it, so you can check it out later if you want. It's a PDF of the book. It's page 5 of the PDF that I sent you, but it's the story of the vanishing hitchhiker. And that story was read to me in elementary. And the name of the hitchhiker, the ghost hitchhiker in this story, her name was Maria. And so I was like, oh my God, I was like, even the name was so close to what her name. One of the characters' names in this book was Mary. So I was just like, whoa, like it's interesting to see how these stories are so similar, regardless of where they're told geographically.
Well, with the Vanishing Hitchhiker specifically, I was just fascinated with it because this particular story is the Chicago area's most famous ghost story. And what I find fascinating about this one, as opposed to like other folk tales about other women that are perceived as monstrous, this particular one, there is like a level of of endearment or warmth over Mary. And while it
Mhm.
isn't, I know we're talking about like Latinidad, like while it isn't a Latino story, I also feel like that it's still like it has hints to an immigrant story. And I think what a lot of people forget, and the arguments I make in a lot of my books when I write about Irish immigrants or Dutch immigrants, is that these people were once the immigrants and were the other at that point in time. And a lot of the persecution that they experienced are now what we are experiencing as Latinos in the
Mhm.
United States. And so that's why I do like to go to like those stories to kind of see like what were they experiencing. And especially I wrote about the Irish immigrants who were working on the Illinois-Michigan Canal. They were literally working on this canal, building it, falling into the river and dying, and nobody cared. Like, and I was just like, this is literally like our immigrant farm workers today. Like these people will work and then get sick from the chemicals or in accidents, and nobody remembers their names. And I remember
Mhm.
when I was doing research, finding accounts of like, yeah, we just don't know how many Irish immigrants died. And I was like, we're literally doing that today to the people today.
Yeah.
And so with this story, I just felt like there was so much historically that I could kind of build onto and ask. And especially with, we're talking about the character or the ghost story. The ghost name is Resurrection Mary. I feel like every single Chicagoan knows this story. If you're born in the city of Chicago or raised in the city of Chicago, you have been told a variation of the Resurrection Mary story. And this was me trying to give her some agency. And in
Mm.
all the accounts of people who have seen her, she always says, "Take me home. I want to go home." And so this was me
Mm.
taking Mary home.
Oh my God. Oh, so good. So good. Thank you.
Hey, what's up? I'm Charlie.
And I'm Tyler,
And we are Believing the Bizarre.
a paranormal podcast that dives into the unknown and the unusual every Tuesday.
We discuss hauntings, cryptids, aliens, UFO encounters, conspiracies, and more.
And we break down whether or not we find them believable.
All right, listen, if you're not paying for electricity, you're not paying for dinner.
Saw a terrifying looking face pressed to the window with gaping eyes.
Almost reached it when the laughter stopped suddenly, and a sound behind me made me turn around.
Like, sorry, like I was gonna do it, but then I had SpaceX.
So we got you covered, whether you like horror or laughs, or both. We actually really hope it's both.
With over 3 million downloads, you'll be joining a bizarro community that we promise is more than just Mothman and our parents.
We even take creepy stories from our listeners and turn them into episodes.
Check out Believing the Bizarre on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Believing the Bizarre, a podcast as bizarre as you are.
I want to ask also if there was a particular scene or an element in Vanishing Daughters that was especially either difficult or rewarding to write. And I want you to choose where to take this question. You don't have to give both. You can just kind of choose one if you'd like to.
Oh, difficult or rewarding? Okay, I will do both. So difficult was writing the
Okay.
serial killer, because to put my brain in the mindset of a serial killer was very, very difficult, and very
Mhm.
disturbing. Rewarding, this is also a grief story. I wrote it while I was not well. My father died and I was very close to him. And I wanted to kind of write about what it feels like to go through grief. And one thing I noticed is that in American culture, to grieve openly is perceived as strange, whereas we just let it all out. Like we cry, we scream, we do what we need to do. And it's seen as so normal. I mean, I remember sitting vigil next to my father's bed. Like we just do this. Death is part of the process. And then I kind of felt like shamed almost by like Americans or American culture because I was grieving so loud. And people were like, "Are you okay?" And there was like, "Is Cynthia losing it?" I'm like, "My father, what do you mean? My father just
Like, no,
died.
I'm not
Of course
okay.
I'm going to
Oh
be
my God.
yeah, and it's okay not to be okay. And I just thought that was so insulting and so disrespectful. Or could you imagine going like I remember my husband, he's like, "Oh yeah, in Mexico, we would be there like with the rosary, doing the rosaries for like days after someone died. It's
Yeah.
part of the process." And I was so insulted that there was this perception that I was grieving too much. And I'm like, "Oh, I'm not grieving enough." And so the book was that. The book was me being like, this is what grief feels like.
Oh my God. Yeah. Again, I just thank you for being so open and so vulnerable. I keep saying thank you because I agree with that. I feel like grief is kind of shamed in some ways. And I don't want to like air their business out, but one of my closest friends, one of my best friends, they lost a parent a couple years ago. And I remember them saying something very similar about how like they felt like they weren't almost allowed to grieve. And so just, again, everything you're saying now and then in reading the book was, wow, it was like just such like a deep look into what those emotions feel and can look like too. So again, for the 100th time, I'm going to keep saying it. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, the main character of the book, Briar Rose Thorne, she's a journalist who starts experiencing these eerie occurrences after her own mother's death. And so I want to ask, you're kind of touching it already, but what was the inspiration behind her character?
I wanted to write a character that was very like on the nose, to be like appended to like a fairy tale. Like I didn't want to like, it's almost like I didn't want to write like Sleeping Beauty herself, and what that meant. But I wanted to write somebody that was like very embedded, or very like representative of what a fairy tale is. And then developing her took a long time. And I think it took me like months to even find her name. And I was just like, I'm just going to go with Briar. And that comes from the Grimm's fairy tales, The Little Briar Rose. So she's a mash of the various characters of Sleeping Beauty, a mix of myself as a journalist, and a third thing that I don't even know where she came from. Yeah,
a third secret ingredient.
Yeah. It took a while to like really pin her down, but I wanted somebody who had been in Chicago for a long time, that had ancestry here, that did have like really, generational roots here, that was connected to this place and time. And then as I was doing the research along Archer Avenue, and this takes place along Archer Avenue, and Archer Avenue is said to be the most haunted road in the Chicagoland area and one of the most haunted roads in the United States. So it's not just Resurrection Mary that's seen here. There's like, people have claimed to have seen like carriages being pulled by like black horses that have like fire coming out of their eyes. People have said that they've seen like monks rising from the woods. So Archer Avenue has a lot of weird stuff. And so when I found that historical piece of all of those Irish immigrants that had died there, I was like, this is it. This is her ancestry.
Yeah. God, yeah, it was really fun to see how you kind of weaved in these folk tales or these ghost stories throughout the book, because the story itself, like the main story, is already, it's creepy and it's eerie. And again, like you said, you got into the mind of a serial killer who you wrote so well, because reading it was like uncomfortable at times. I was like, oh, this person is making me like crawl in my skin. So the work paid off. But also the weaving yeah, the weaving of those stories into the novel was so good. And the novel itself, it touches on the horrors of real life, the horrors like tremendous grief and violence, particularly violence against women. And this book is about a serial killer targeting women over years, and it's countless women, countless lives lost. How do you approach this weaving of supernatural horror with real world terror?
That's a great question. It's one of the things I usually do when I'm drafting a novel is I know I'm going to go into it with a fairy tale or a folk tale in mind. I usually want some type of true crime element as well. And then we'll have like the overall arching story. With this story, we have had a lot of community members have claimed that there's a serial killer operating in the city of Chicago. There have been reports of over 51 women predominantly women of color throughout the city who have been murdered in very similar circumstances. And I thought it was very strange and scary that law enforcement keeps brushing aside the very similar instances in which they're found. And so I wanted to explore a serial killer in this story that is like obsessed with of course, women, and there's a very specific type of woman. You had mentioned writing, being in his voice was very upsetting. It took me a while to find that voice and to develop that serial killer's voice. And I did a lot of research reading up different serial killers. Like I read Silence of the Lambs again, but I'm like, that's not really him. And someone said you should read Joyce Carol Oates' Zombie. And that book is loosely based off of a young Jeffrey Dahmer, and it's told from his perspective. I couldn't even finish the book. Like I was reading it and I was like, yep, that's kind of, I was starting to get the voice of my serial killer. And I was like, I want this book out of my house. Like I literally, I got halfway through and then I went and I donated it to like a community library center. I was like, I don't even want this book. It was so disturbing.
Oh my God.
Joyce Carol Oates' Zombie. It is disturbing. It's like loosely based off of a young Jeffrey Dahmer. It's like, oh.
Yeah. Wow. But a great reference for character study, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So have you, as we, approach the end of our interview, and I forgot to mention earlier, this is a video episode available for patrons on patreon.com/sustopodcast. So as we wrap up our interview and before we jump into the Patreon exclusive questions, have you ever had your own experience or encounter with the paranormal? And if so, could you share that with us?
That's a great question, because I was like a paranormal investigative girly, like hardcore for a while. I've gone to so many different places with my tape recorders and my different equipment. I've done it all. I was like spending nights in the cemetery and going to abandoned places. And I never, ever, ever experienced anything until randomly, my husband and I had taken a ghost tour, like a fun ghost tour in Chicago as tourists. And then this is what my book before Vanishing Daughters is based off of, Forgotten Sisters. We were standing outside of the Chicago River, and the tour guide is like, 811 people died in the Chicago River right here in 1915. He starts telling us the story, and he tells us if you take pictures, you'll see orbs. Some people claim to see a face. And I was like, at that point, I was so like disillusioned. I'm like, I'm not going to see anything. And I just started taking a ton of pictures. And then as I was scrolling through the pictures, there was a woman standing behind me and she like screamed. She's like, oh my God, there's a woman in your picture. And we zoomed in and it's like from shoulder up of a woman looking out from the water. And we were just like,
oh my,
it was so creepy. And that's what my book, Forgotten Sisters, is based off of. And it was because of that I'm like, okay, something's there. And I felt very like,
God.
I've always struggled with wanting to believe. And after that, I felt like, okay, there's a cosmic wink. The universe is like winking at me. There's something there. So.
Yeah. Oh my God. I had like just full chills when you said that. Ugh.
It was very, yeah, it was like a face. People were just like, that's a face staring at you. And since then, I was like, I have to write the story. And so, yeah. It might look grainy
Wow,
now
wow,
because
wow.
it was a Canon camera, but yeah, we would have like
Yeah.
scrolling on the viewfinder. But yeah, I'll show it to you.
Oh my God, that is so cool. And
Yeah.
our final question, this is something new that I want to start asking guests. So you'll be the first person to answer this question on Susto. I want to know what is haunting you right now. So if you have any books or movies or music, or multiple things that are just currently like, just can't get them out of your head. What's haunting you at this moment?
You know what's haunting me? Saints. Like the stories of the. I don't know. Like I've had this like weird thing with different saints lately, and I've been like researching different saints, and I mean there's like thousands of saints, and then some of them aren't even recorded because like their history was like never. The original saints were sainted by cults or by like they became like a cultish activity. I don't know. So I've been really fascinated with saints and their stories and how some of them have some wild stories of sainthood. So yeah, that's been my thing. I've been on a very like iconography thing lately, and I don't know where it's going, so I'm just writing that out. But some of these saints have got some wild stories. Heads being chopped off.
Yeah. Oh, wow, that's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and going into meditative states, and it's some like Joan of Arc. You forget we forget Joan of Arc was like burned at the stake as a witch, and she's a saint. So I don't know. I've been really into saints lately.
Wow. Oh my God, that is such a good answer, especially for the first time that I'm asking it on here. So such a great answer. Yeah, I was actually yesterday, it's so funny you mentioned, I was going around town here in Austin, and I was dropping off some red cards, the Know Your Rights cards for immigration, and in case someone has encounters with ICE. And one of the places that I went to, oh, of course, one of the places that I went to, it was a shop that had candles and stuff, and there was a wall that was just all candles, and it was all saint candles, a big section of it. And I was looking at them, I was like, wow, there's so many of these that I had never heard of. And like, obviously people are working with them or praying to them or putting in petitions with them because their candles are here. So it's so interesting. I wish I had taken a picture. If I go by again, I'll take a picture and I'll send it to you, and hopefully that'll contribute to your study on saints.
Yeah, I'm just so fascinated. I'm like, I feel like there's almost like this reclamation, and I think there's a portion of us that are like reclaiming that we can reclaim these images, and I can reclaim it, as
Absolutely,
non-binary or LGBTQ. Like I can reclaim this image and this strength and this power and tap into it. I don't know. There's something there. I don't know what it is. It's kind of, and I think it's all kind of started with the bishop recently. Remember when the bishop it kind of went viral a few days ago?
Yeah, I saw
that. Trump, she's just like, have some mercy on trans children, on immigrants. I was just like, yeah, reclaim this. So I loved it.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my God. Yeah, that was such a beautiful moment. Yeah. Oh my. Well, speaking of beautiful moments, once again, thank you so much for coming on to Susto, and also for writing Vanishing Daughters. Again, it is available now. If you haven't yet, please go pick up your copy. Right after this, we are just going to jump into the bonus Patreon content. But for anybody who is not a Patreon, a Best School Friend subscriber on Patreon, thank you so much for listening today. Cynthia, thank you so much for your time, for being here. If people wanted to find you online or in stores, where could they look for you?
Thank you. You can find me online at cynthiapelayo.com. I'm on Blue Sky and Substack, and for now, Instagram. I'm still on Instagram. But overall, for my books, you can find them in Barnes & Noble or any of your favorite local indie bookstores.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hey, Ghoul friends, this is Aiden. I am jumping in while editing because I realized that I forgot to promote the book giveaway that Cynthia and I are doing. Cynthia was so kind and so generous as to donate
2 signed copies of her books. To learn how to enter the giveaway and win your signed copy, you can do so by checking out the social media post for this episode on Instagram. Again, that is at Susto Podcast on every social media platform, but this giveaway is happening on Instagram. So go to this post, swipe through the carousel to learn how to enter and win your signed copy of a Cynthia Pelayo book. Good luck!